Sprint races are currently dividing opinions more than ever in F1. From the fans to the team principals to the drivers, it feels like we're nowhere near close enough to accepting them as part of the norm in F1, and there is still plenty of work to be done to make the drivers happy to race in them, let alone the fans happy to watch them. Good friend of mine and racing driver Brad Philpott put out a poll on Twitter simply asking, sprint races in F1, get rid of them, keep them as they are, or keep them but change the format. Now, whilst the majority of people voted to get rid of them, there was still a decent amount of people that felt that they should stay with a different format. However, the most important takeaway from me was that barely anyone wanted the current format to stay as it is. The problem with the current format for me is that it just feels disjointed. Having qualifying for a race that's happening in 2 days' time, whilst we fit in this whole other dedicated event in between then, it felt strange when it first happened in Baku, and it felt strange when it happened in Austin. Sprint races themselves have been a controversial concept since their inception in 2021. They were brought in first and foremost to make F1 more money, so let's just get that out of the way. More competitive sessions means more eyeballs on the sport, which means more money from broadcasters, sponsors, and race organisers for Formula 1. Now, in fairness, they were also a response to criticism from fans that Friday practice sessions offered nothing exciting, nothing competitive, and nothing worth actually watching. It was a way to make more of the weekend competitive for the people watching at home, and also to give the people paying for tickets at the track more for their money with more meaningful track time during the 3 days. And now, what doesn't then get talked about enough is that yes, fans get more for their money, but they're also paying a hell of a lot more money in the first place. I am not necessarily going to be talking about ticket prices specifically now because that is a topic for a whole other video, but it's not as if fans are getting more for their money necessarily because they're also paying more money. F1 tickets over the last 3 years have gone from expensive to extortionate to whatever word you want to use for what's happening in Las Vegas. And so it feels like more for your money should almost be the bare minimum given how much more money F1 fans are having to spend in the first place. Over the last 3 years, because of this channel and the support that I've received from you watching my videos, I have been lucky enough to have gone to 4 different Grand Prix. In 2021, I went to Silverstone. In 2022, I didn't get to go to any races, but then in 2023, I went to Silverstone, Austria, and Hungary. 2 out of the 4 races were sprint races, and also coincidentally with different formats as well. And so, having experienced it multiple times for myself, the biggest compliment that I can give to sprint races, and why I do think that they have a place in Formula 1 is that, from my experience, and I have yet to hear different speaking to other fans, attending a race weekend when it's a sprint has always made for a better experience. I would choose to go to a sprint race over a regular race 9 times out of 10. But what's interesting is that I don't have the same opinion when it comes to watching the races at home. I definitely like the variety of having a sprint every so often, but it's not a format that I'd want every single weekend. For this video, I wanted to get plenty of opinions from other F1 fans, and so over on my Twitter, I asked if fans thought the sprint had a place in Formula 1, and also what changes they'd like to see, as well as any other thoughts. As of recording, over 150 people commented on that post, and whilst there are people who fundamentally don't like the sprint and want to get rid of it entirely, I think the majority of people from what I read were fine with the sprint, but just not happy with the current format more than anything else. The sprint is here to stay, and I'd be shocked if that changes anytime soon. There are tracks and countries which are literally willing to pay more to host a race just for their Grand Prix to be a sprint. But this is where Formula 1 must wield that power very carefully. Sprints at the best of times are only as good as the tracks that you have them on, and even in Austin, which is usually a very good track for racing, showed that that's not always the case. The tracks for sprints should be solely chosen on the historical quality of the racing there and not just by the highest bidder. I will say, I don't think a particular track should also have a stranglehold over always hosting a sprint. If a sprint has been dull there in back-to-back seasons, then I think it's understandable to give another track a try, but again, it's important that everyone chooses the tracks for the right reasons. In terms of the number of sprints, although I do remember there being a little bit of backlash when it was first announced that in 2023 we would have 6 compared to the 3 we had in 22 and 21, I think that criticism has gone a little bit quiet as the season has gone on, and so for a 22 race season having 6 sprints, which is almost a quarter of the season, I think that's a decent balance. I would also say that in the future, I think that there should become a rule in the Concord Agreement that 6 sprints is the absolute limit, because the whole point is that throughout the season they add a bit of variety to an otherwise familiar format, but having too many and having them almost become the norm starts to defeat the purpose. Since they came into the sport, there has always been this big debate about how much they actually add or detract from the Grand Prix on a Sunday, and this has been talked about not just by fans, but drivers as well. Despite being the most successful sprint driver during this time, Max Verstappen has been arguably its biggest critic, saying in Austin, "If you want to know my honest opinion about sprint weekends, I don't really get excited by it. I just feel like once you complete Friday qualifying, you are a bit lost. I feel like we only need one qualifying in the weekend where you really put everything on the line, and it feels great." This morning as well, I put it on P1 and was like, it's a Saturday. There's not many points anyway for the race. And besides that, like, now we've done this race, everyone more or less knows what's going to happen tomorrow between all of the cars in terms of pace. So it takes away a bit of the excitement of it. If we had not done today and we only have the qualifying that we had yesterday, you don't really know what's going to happen in the race. It's exciting to turn on the TV because you don't know and also we don't know, but now we know. I definitely agree that the sprint spoils certain elements of the race before they even happen. For example, in Austin, despite Leclerc qualifying on pole for the Grand Prix, looking at how much they struggled with their tyres in the sprint, we knew straight away that in the race Ferrari were going to struggle to hang on to the podium, let alone even think about converting their pole into a win. Despite this, I don't think that we can always have the assumption that if we have a good sprint, it's going to be a good race, and if we have a bad sprint, it's going to be a bad race. I mean, take Austria and Austin. Although admittedly the weather played a massive part, in Austria I thought the sprint was amazing watching from the grandstand, but then the race to me was a little bit forgettable looking back at the season. Then if we look at Austin last time out, the sprint, even by Max's admission, was pretty boring, as he finished 9 seconds in front of Hamilton, who himself finished 8 seconds in front of Leclerc in just 19 laps. However, on the Sunday, although we already had a glimpse into the pace of some of the teams, we still had at one point a fight for the win between 3 different drivers, there was plenty of battles throughout the midfield, and the win wasn't certain by any means, all the way up until the end of the race with Lewis catching Max. If we accept that sprints are here to stay, then the next problem is that no two fans can actually agree on what the right format should be going forward. There was a lot of fans that mentioned wanting to see either one-shot qualifying or reverse championship grids be incorporated into the sprints, and I am someone who's never really been a fan of any of those formats. A one-shot qualifying is nothing new to Formula 1, and having watched quite a few of those sessions from the mid-2000s, my biggest problem is that whilst they'll be interesting and different at the beginning, I think people will get very bored very quickly of watching the slowest drivers every single time before we get to the bit that everyone really wants to watch, which is the fight for pole. As far as reverse grids based off championship order, or any kind of reverse grid races, or whilst they are used in the lower formula, the reason why they work and are used there is not just for entertainment, it's also used as a tool to train inexperienced drivers in racecraft. Formula 1 is not a finishing school, and we also don't use spec cars for a reason. I have always had a fundamental problem with the idea of rewarding a driver or team with a better grid position for being slow, when we have a Constructors' Championship which is designed to reward teams for building the best cars. And not to mention, endlessly watching someone like Max come through the field because slower cars were artificially put in front of him isn't exactly going to feel exciting or earned if we have to watch him do it 6 times a season. One thing that I have liked is that although it's very difficult to get the teams to agree on anything really, Formula 1 has actually tried to shake things up. They've tried to use different formats based off the back of the feedback from drivers and fans, and at the very least, it's good to see at least some level of flexibility to try something different and then admit if it hasn't worked out. With that in mind, here is a format that I've come up with that I feel gives enough of a variety to a weekend without putting in too many gimmicks just for the sake of entertainment. On the Friday, I would have the standard 60-minute FP1 session to start, and then I would jump into sprint qualifying, with the teams only being able to use the hard tyres for SQ1, mediums for SQ2, and softs for SQ3. On Saturday, I would then have the sprint race based off the grid from sprint quali, with qualifying for the Grand Prix after that. Sunday, of course, would then be unaffected with the Grand Prix. The important thing that I'd include is that cars would only be locked in parc ferme after the sprint race, meaning you have FP1, sprint quali, and the sprints for you to experiment and set your car up before everything is locked going into regular qualifying for the Grand Prix. Admittedly, there are still problems. On Saturday, having a race in the morning with a regular qualifying afterwards means scrutineering the cars might be a little bit tight on time before they need to be handed back to the teams ahead of regular qualifying in 2-3 hours time. There's also the question of what happens if someone crashes in the sprint ahead of qualifying. Would the teams have enough time to fix it? Although that's the same risk as the drivers have now if they crash during FP3. This, however, is just the format that I think is a good enough balance and compromise that adds some variety to the calendar without going too far over the top. It's not perfect by any means, but this is where I'd like to get your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think about my proposed format, and more importantly, what format do you think F1 should trial going forward? Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.